The scripture lesson today comes from Mark chapter 3, verses 31 through 35. People have just accused Jesus of being possessed by Satan. I assume that his family arrives to give him some support through a difficult time like this. His mother and brothers arrived. They stood outside and sent word to him, calling for him. A crowd was seated around him, and those sent to him said, "Look, your mother, brothers, and sisters are outside looking for you." He replied, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers?" Looking around at those seated around him in a circle, he said, "Look, here are my mother and brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother, sister, and mother."
Oh, there. I'll take these. You remember the story about the young girl who was driving home after her baby brother was baptized, and she's crying. And Dad leans over to the back and says, "What's wrong? What's wrong? We had a great day. It was beautiful." And she says, "Yeah, but the priest said he wanted us kids to be brought up in a Christian home, and I want to stay with you guys." Family. Well, I've got another quick little joke that doesn't really have much to do about the family, but it does have to do. I hope it's funny. Anyway, okay. Did you hear about the cannibal who was expelled from school? He was buttering up his teacher. Okay. Blake, you like that one? Okay. Okay, good. Well, here we go. Even the best families here on earth are just kind of a prototype of what we have yet to come. It is just going to be amazing. First of all, did you remember that Jesus had brothers and sisters? Some folks remember, some folks don't. He was part of a family. It says right there in Mark. And it says in Matthew 2. So why is family so important? And why do you think Jesus shocks us like this when he says, "Yeah, but I'm not going to go to my family. You're all my family"? It's kind of shocking. And some people have used this text to say, well, if my family doesn't do God's will, then I'm not going to have anything to do with them. I've seen it in my own family, and it bothers me completely and totally, because that's not the intention of this text. It's not to separate. It's to bring us together in a bigger, more wonderful family than we could ever possibly imagine. The context of this is that Jesus has just been accused of being Satan. And there he is with all these people that are following him. What if your leader was accused of being Satan? Wouldn't it shock you? You trust this person. You believe that this is the person is doing the best he can, and yet somebody calls him Satan. And then along comes Jesus' family to kind of support him. I think it doesn't say that, but it definitely doesn't say that they came to divide. But they're there, and Jesus is with these people that have just heard him being accused of being Satan, and I imagine Jesus is saying, "Hey, these people need me right now." It's the family can wait a little bit. I need to stay with people that need me. Remember the stories of when the mother was asked, "Well, which one of your 12 kids do you love the most?" And her answer was, "The one who's hurting the worst right at the moment." That's the way God works. If we're in need, we will never, ever be without the Lord. And I think that's what's happening here with Jesus. His nuclear family came to give support. They didn't come so that he could divide and say family's not important, which is the way some of people take this verse. And that's just sad. Don't listen to the lies. Don't listen to the deceiver. Listen and be the voice of compassion and healing. Love God and love others. 3 things here. Love God and love others. Serve Christ by reaching the world. And glorify God by enjoying Him now. Enjoy your life and look forward to our futures together because, it's going to be amazing. Our author of this book raises a question: can honoring family sometimes slip into worshiping family? I wondered about that. I'd never heard anybody ask that question before. But I know that family has a purpose to actually to support each other and lift each other up and to love each other and share the joy, right? I mean, I've heard stories about your families that are just amazing. Heard a story just the other day about a family that got together to celebrate a birthday and cooked up in a pit. It was fantastic. A great story. And we all have those stories, don't we? Absolutely. We're here to support each other. And sometimes when somebody's in need, we're there to take away their fear. We don't want to lose family, but Jesus, what He does here is He expands the definition of family. I've been reading, I've got a new devotional by Philip Yancey, and every day he takes part of one of his great books, and so it's kind of a greatest hits of everything he's written, Well, he talked one day here this last week about words that tend to spoil over time. He says words sometimes change their meaning. They spoil if you leave them, like meat spoils, if you leave it out. And he talked about, in the King James Version, the word that was used for agape love in that translation, the greatest love of all, the unconditional love from God, the best love they translated as charity. How about that? That word has definitely changed over time, hasn't it? From being the greatest love we can ever imagine to sometimes you hear people saying, I don't want your charity. It's totally different in meaning now, isn't it? And then he went on to say there's one word that really hasn't changed too much over time, and that is grace. God's grace. Every way that you use the term grace contains some of that original meaning, that unconditional love that we get from God. Grace reminds us that good things don't come because of anything we do our own efforts. Good things are a gift of God, and we rejoice in those. The world thirsts for grace, and they may not even know it. That's why here, 200 years, not too long ago, 200 years after the song Amazing Grace was written, somebody sang it, and it was back on the top 10 charts again. Amazing Grace was not too long ago. Just amazing grace. Jesus restores the brokenness of even shattered families. And a lot of us have been through things that shattered our families for a time, but Jesus brings us back together again. Family in the eternal scheme of things is going to be completely different than what we think of today. There's a scripture that I remember finding it for the first time, and I thought, well, what's that scripture all about? But in Matthew 22:30, Jesus is they're trying to trick him in chapter 22. Okay, now if this woman has been married to 7 people, whose husband will she be in eternity? And you know what he answers? He says, you know that they no longer marry or are given in marriage in eternity, but that we will be like the angels. Family is going to be totally different in eternity. Jesus took the definition of family and stretched it and extended it to, what did he say? All those who do the will of God. That passage is just amazing. Nothing in that passage undermines the families that we have today. The commands of honor your father and mother, love your wife, And wives, you have it easy. You only have to respect your husbands. Love your spouse. Respect your family. He extends that definition of family to all of us. There's an interesting phrase that I read. Grace like water flows to the lowest part. Grace flows to where we need it, doesn't it? It really and truly does. Our goal in life is to create a family that'll be a light to the nations. And sometimes when people are different than we are, if we don't know people, you might think it's hard to do. But I found a video, and so if you'll turn up the video sound, I will click it here and start it. But this video is a guy brings together people that haven't even met yet. And well, that's all I'll say for now. And just watch what happens.
45-year-old Richard Rinaldi is looking for someone. Two someones, actually. Two total strangers who were meant to be together.
This is Dominic, right?
If only for a moment.
Okay, so you guys are going to be a couple. They're not exactly sure what they've just signed up for. Actually, and people are a little nervous at first. Okay. I just need you a little closer, okay, good.
Richard is a New York photographer working on a series of portraits.
Okay, good.
For each shot, he grabs strangers off the street, like Jenny Wood, an airline employee from Virginia, and Dominic Tucker, a college student from Brooklyn, and poses them like adoring family.
Beautiful. 1, 2, and 3.
Richard calls the project Touching Strangers. He started shooting it 6 years ago and now has hundreds of portraits of these unlikely intimates. Some of the photos you'd never know they'd never met, while others capture quite well the inherent awkwardness of cuddling some random dude.
Hey, nice meeting you.
Even when the subjects seem eager, their body language often concedes a certain hesitance, at least at first. 10 minutes later, though, it's like Thanksgiving at Aunt Margaret's. And that's the really weird thing.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, Richard puts the people in these poses, but the sentiment that seems to shine through is real. At least, so say the subjects.
Okay.
It was sort of awkward, but then sort of not.
You guys did so good.
We are probably missing so much about the people all around us.
This is Reiko.
At first, Brian Sneeden, a poetry teacher, saw no rhyme or reason for posing with 95-year-old retired fashion designer Reiko Ehrman.
Can you just come in a little more? Yeah, okay.
But eventually, he too felt a change.
I felt like I cared for her.
Cared for her.
Yeah, I felt like it brought down a lot of barriers.
Pretty much everyone
It was a good feeling.
shared that same sentiment.
It was nice to feel that comfort.
Everyone seems to have come away with kind of a good feeling. It's kind of lovely. It's lovely.
Most photographers capture life as it is. But in these strangers, Richard Rinaldi has captured something much more ethereal and elusive. He shows us humanity as it could be, as most of us wish it would be, and as it was, at least for this one fleeting moment in time. Steve Hartman, On the Road, in New York.
Now, I'm not recommending you go out and start hugging people on the street. But as that woman said, what are we missing out on by not getting to know that person that's probably looks a little different than we do? How much are we missing out on? Are we missing out on what Jesus defined family? Sometimes, you don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step. Just make an effort to get to know somebody, and you might find out that that person that you thought was pretty different than you are has got a lot in common with you. And it might even be their faith. It might be sitting next to somebody on an airplane that pulls out a Bible. It'll make a difference in your life, and it'll truly, truly make a difference in all of eternity. So remember that grace, like water, flows to the lowest part. I want to close by reminding you that we are all God's children. The Scripture talks about, Jesus actually calls his Father Abba, which is translated as daddy. That kind of a closeness is what Jesus has with God and what Jesus wishes for us, to be able to call God daddy. I want to close with a quote from the movie Mrs. Doubtfire. How many of you have seen Mrs. Doubtfire? A lot of you. Yeah, Robin Williams probably at one of his best, you know. Well, at the end of the movie, he ends up giving advice as dressed as Mrs. Doubtfire. And he's on TV, you know, and people write into him. And here's what he gives for advice to a young lady who is having trouble understanding family. He says this: "There are all sorts of different families, Katie. Some families have one mommy, some families have one daddy, or two families. And some children live with their uncle or aunt, some live with their grandparents, and some children live with foster parents. Some live in separate homes, in separate neighborhoods, in different areas of the country, and may not see each other for days or weeks, months, or even years at a time. But if there's love, dear, those are the ties that bind, and you'll have a family in your heart forever." If there is love, dear, those are the ties that bind, and you'll have a family in your heart forever. And so we live as family. We may not see each other for a week at a time, or who knows, some of you are here today, we may not see you for months. But take the love with you. Recognize the Christ in each other, that none of us is perfect. And it takes a lifetime to live into the love that Jesus gives us.